Have the second NGO, the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development. I invite you now to take the microphone.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you also to all the panelists for their very insightful contributions today. My name is Mark Jordan. I represent the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, or an ECOSOC accredited NGO that looks to promote the sustainable development of the Dominican Republic. Now, I wanted to return to the initial point that you, Madam Moderator, raised regarding financing for development and innovative tools for financing. And our organization actually works on several research fellow studies a year, and one in particular recently has been looking at impact investment as a topic for sustainable development. And we have been looking in particular at the renewable energy industry and the sustainable agriculture industry as potential areas that can produce poverty eradication, but also support the SDG goals with regards to environmental sustainability. Some of the policy hurdles that we have found have been particularly with regards to the lack of a legal framework in developing countries that deal with this potential opportunity, and particularly within regards to the renewable energy industry itself, being a very technical industry that requires a significant amount of investment up front. There are specific incentives that need to be in place to attract the private sector investment. And the second part to this issue is the fact that even when these policy frameworks are in place, we find a significant reluctance on behalf of the private sector to invest in developing countries where there is a fear of maybe a lack of transparency or issues of corruption. And I wanted to learn a little bit more from the representatives for Peru, His Excellency Ambassador Metzequadra, and also His Excellency Ambassador Suru of the Maldives, to know maybe if they could share some best practices with regards to impact investment, particularly with the focus on the renewable energy industry, because I know there are significant opportunities in their countries to develop these issues, and I wanted to know what policy frameworks they had put in place to maybe incentivize the private sector to invest in these industries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and particularly for getting into the spirit of things and asking a question. Much appreciated. While their excellencies are considering their comments, I am going to invite His Excellency, the President of this session, and the Vice President of ECOSOC, to make his own intervention.
Thank you, Madam, and just in the same spirit of interactivity, I thought I've been sitting idle and doing nothing for a long time. I need to also earn my living. So I had a question about this financial and cash flow programs like the one that Mr. Teves talked about. We have a very similar and a very successful program in Pakistan as well, called the Benazir Income Support Program. And I wanted to kind of compare it with what we heard yesterday from one of our keynote speakers, which was the Akhuwat Foundation of Pakistan, which have a small loan program with a particular disbursement is around $200 per family or per person. Now, we've often heard that if you find a hungry person, rather than giving him a fish, ask him or teach him to catch a fish. How does this cash dispersal work in that framework? And especially since we are sitting in the integration segment, is that kind of a more integrated policy approach? Is that something that we should encourage other countries to start doing? Or is the other approach, which is giving loans or which is providing people the opportunity to earn a living, a better approach? Thank you.
In terms of the Brazilian experience, we have both in Brazil. It's not exactly microcredit because it's run by the Brazilian Development Bank, which is It's a big thing. But they have, it's not microcredit. Let's call it small credit for small farmers and for cooperatives. And in terms of the small farmers, there are lines of credit made by Banco do Brasil, by the Brazilian bank, to them as well. So we have these kind of programs. It's not the traditional microcredit program, but they are there, especially for rural areas. It's interesting because we know very often we know Brazil because of agribusiness. Brazil is probably the one of the most important exporters of agricultural products in the world. But it surprised me when I knew that Brazil, something between 70 and 75% of what we eat in Brazil comes from small farmers, not from the big agribusiness farmers in Brazil. So this is one dimension of the program. In terms of the cash transfer program, what we have is a set of conditions that should be achieved in order to keep in order to allow the families to keep in the program. So the children must be in the schools, and there are several instruments in place to enforce that. The families have to go to the clinics often. And the children have to be vaccinated. So you have a set of conditions that should be met, and the idea is that since these conditions are met, these people will have their capacity strengthened, and in a way they will be able to get out of the program in a while. So let's say it's a way to deal with two things. We have this saying in Brazil that a small plate of food does not feed the dog. And there is another answer to that, which says that you're saying that because you're not hungry. So we have to deal with the immediate needs of these population because they are hungry. And we have to deal with that today. But at the same time, we have to allow them to develop the necessary skills to get out of this kind of assistance program in a while. And I do think that the cash transfer, the conditional cash transfer does both at the same time. In a way, it helps to develop skills and at the same time deals with the needs, the urgent needs of this population. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make one more comment?
Mr. President, of course.
Thank you. No, absolutely, you're absolutely right. As you were speaking, I just realized that, one of the conditions that we have in the Benazir Income Support Program that we have is that the cash dispersals are done to the lady of the house. Yeah. So it's a kind of women empowerment initiative, as well as it's a kind of it kind of tells people that the women are probably the more responsive and responsible. So, and that's, and that works very well. Thank you.
I just want to pick up on the last notes of Mr. Estevez and His Excellency, the President of the session. This note on women, first of all, Mr. Estevez, for scale, I wanted to ask you what is the size of the grant to the farmers, just so that we can get a sense, because His Excellency, the President, spoke to the U.S. value of the grants in Pakistan. You observed that the majority of food in Brazil was produced by small farmers. And I would just want to say that if you do research on the FAO site, the Food and Agricultural Organization, you will find that your experience in Brazil is duplicated worldwide, that the majority of food is produced not on large farms, but on small farms across the world, and the majority of it is produced by women who often are barred by law in some countries from owning the land on which they produce, and they themselves are frequently unable to afford the food that they produce. And this, when we talk about ending poverty and ending poverty in all its forms, it is that kind of targeted policy understanding and initiative that will become important in creating a level platform for all citizens, and that kind of gender lens through which we have to look to develop policy prescriptions. So I just wanted to ask that question and to make that observation and to put in the point about the role of women and the gender lens in relation to policy. I believe that a question was asked of Their Excellencies, the ambassadors, by the speaker from the second NGO who spoke this morning, the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development.
Muchas gracias. Efectivamente se hizo una consulta sobre el tema de la participación del sector privado en las energías renovables. El Perú es un país que, por sus características geográficas, ha tenido principalmente su energía derivada de la hidroeléctrica y también de recursos fósiles, ¿no? Hemos tenido en los últimos años especialmente desarrollo del gas. Pero el objetivo del gobierno es tener una matriz diversificada. Hace muchos gobiernos que vienen promoviendo la inversión en energías renovables, pero por razones técnicas y también la necesidad de ir adaptando nuestra legislación, hacerla más atractiva, no ha crecido todavía en la medida del esperado. Sin embargo, hay un potencial importante en el norte del país, específicamente para el tema de la energía eólica, así que se están haciendo algunos esfuerzos, han habido inversiones, pero todavía no en un monto significativo. En el sur del país sí ha comenzado una inversión interesante en materia de energía solar. Se está instalando la primera planta solar con una inversión de la empresa italiana Enel en el departamento de Tacna, al sur del país, y es un área que tiene el recurso solar, es un área muy soleada todos los días del año. En consecuencia, hay una inversión de aproximadamente 170 millones de dólares. Esta planta va a proveer de más de 180 miles de megabytes, 180 megabytes, lo cual es una primera inversión, pero creo que significa que ya el sector privado está considerando al Perú como un lugar atractivo para la inversión. El elemento renovable es clave para nuestro país porque el Perú es muy vulnerable, es uno de los países más vulnerables al cambio climático y por eso estamos promoviendo todas las industrias que contribuyan a reducir esta vulnerabilidad. El Perú se ha comprometido a través del Acuerdo de París con sobre todo en el ámbito de reforestación, el tema forestal es clave. Y el tema del agua, el Perú es un país privilegiado por agua, sin embargo, un sector alto de la población, como mencioné, no tiene acceso a saneamiento y agua potable. Para promover la inversión privada, estamos desarrollando especialmente un programa que es de obras por impuestos. Ha sido muy exitoso en los últimos años. El sector privado presenta proyectos en diversas partes del Perú en los que puede ser financiado y desarrollado por este sector privado a cambio de la reducción de impuestos. O sea, los impuestos que iba a pagar la empresa privada son descontados de tal manera que es un mecanismo muy eficiente y ya se han desarrollado obras de infraestructura principalmente a lo largo de todo el país mediante este mecanismo atractivo que se llama obras por impuestos. Eso podría mencionar.
Thank you. Yes, renewable energy is something which Maldives is very much focused on because just like as my colleague from Peru has just mentioned, Maldives is also a country which has been importing fossil fuel a lot. 19% of our GDP is spent on the import of fossil fuel. In fact, that's a huge amount for a small country like the Maldives, which does not have any economic base so large. Therefore, the government has been very much focused on that the ultimate goal for addressing the issues of climate change, which is Maldives at the very forefront of that climate change impacts. And therefore, we know that unless we do reduce the reliance on fossil fuel, we will not be able to move on with our economic development. The government is having a very ambitious goal of completely turning into renewable energy, and at this moment we have an ambitious goal of proceeding with 50% of our peak load energy consumption to go into renewables within 3 years. In fact, that's quite an ambitious goal, and that has been right on the mark at the moment. And when it comes to private sector, the private sector has been very much a partnership with the government. In fact, the private sector has done quite a lot of investments, because the way that the Maldives, as I described earlier, we have so many islands, 185 islands which are inhabited. In addition, we have 110 islands which are resorts. These are because being a attractive tourist destination, we have 5-star and above hotels in these 110 islands, and these are all private sector. This is entirely the private. All the international big chains in the hotel industry are operating their resorts in these islands, and they in turn has taken quite a lot of initiative in conveying these ambitious goal of the government. You would have learned from the news that at the beginning of last year, we saw one particular resort which has turned off the diesel generator and has made the whole resort being run on renewable energy, on solar energy source. So by and large, quite a lot of investments going on by the private sector. At the same time, we have entered into a lot of international partnerships into the private sector partnerships as well, to convert the entire country into renewable energy pathway. Thank you.
Thank you. There are 2 points to be made here. First, it is that, again, if you go perhaps to the site of Sustainable Energy for All and the World Bank, you will find that global investment in green energy is now outstripping investment in traditional energy sources, and that is going to be significant for developing countries, particularly in relation to small island developing states, and in those countries that have high capacity for renewables from solar, from wind, and from water, because there is the opportunity to create sustainable energy investment and to therefore cut spending on fossil fuels and to put that revenue stream into further development spending. His Excellency, the President, was making a point about the women being more responsive and responsible, and I wanted to comment on that, and then I distracted myself by asking information of Brazil. But I do want to pick that theme up to observe that. Your Excellency, you are making a point that was certainly my experience as a politician. I was a Minister of Government for 14 years and an elected parliamentarian. And I certainly found that when we supported women in getting jobs and in mentoring them so that they were able to move from unemployment to employment and prepared them for the labor force, that my experience was that the families tended to do better. They put more of the income that they earned into family care. The children then became better educated, were looked after better. The quality of meals they had. The women became more curious and they learned more, and they applied that learning within the household. And I thought that this was very much peculiar to my constituency when I was a young politician, now a long time ago. And then I found that it certainly was a national experience. But Boston University has perhaps 2 years ago done a study and found exactly that same phenomenon, that when you train and educate women, when they have access to income, that households tend to do far better. So there is a direct benefit from investing in women and ensuring that women do have access to decent work. There is a social and economic, a direct social and economic benefit for that, from that. And again, I go back to the issue of targeted policy approaches and to observing, to bring in a gender lens. Now, at 10 minutes to 1 o'clock, I am supposed to hand the panel back to His Excellency. And therefore, I am going to pose my two final questions and ask the members of the panels, if they would be kind enough to answer these questions so that we can conclude and really give ECOSOC some significant takeaway. And my questions are these. We have had the Millennium Development Goals. We now have the SDGs, a much larger, more diverse platform with more goals and more targets. Does the panel anticipate that there will be policy trade-offs in the new development platform? If so, in what areas? And what nexus approaches can be employed in terms of policy to minimize the trade-offs that may have to be taken? One. My second question would be, to what extent can we bridge the gap in implementation by creating structures that are more responsive at the national level? And three, my final question, therefore, is directly in relation to ECOSOC and the UN. What can the United Nations system and ECOSOC do to further assist countries in the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 development platform? Because we want to give them specifics to show how they can be helpful to member states. So those are my three final questions. They relate to approaches, they relate to architecture, they relate to policy, they relate to partnerships, they relate to the role of the UN and ECOSOC, and perhaps somebody might want to talk about financing as well, but I'm not going to tell you how to answer because you have done so very well so far by carrying this discussion in the absence of a room that has been enthusiastic. So I throw the panel open to all panel members. I'll ask the panel members to speak concisely so that we come within the time frame, or interpreters have been extremely generous this morning, and I am going to ask Their Excellencies Ambassador Maitza-Quadra and Ambassador Sarir to speak last and bring us to conclusion, at which point I will hand over to His Excellency the President. So perhaps we can start on my extreme left with Mr. Sambili, and then we will come to Mr. Esteves, and then we will go down to Mr. Samanayan, and then we will come back to Their Excellencies Ambassador Sarir and Maitza-Quadra, with Ambassador Maitza-Quadra speaking first, and then closing with Ambassador Sarir, who opened for us this morning.
Thank you very much. I think in terms of the trade-offs, it is obvious that, of course, resources will be the major constraint when it comes to implementing all the range of policy